But just kind of to set the bar, when we looked at it, and as I review and reflect on the last 2 years, the thing that really hit me, and I'll refer to this through the next 20 minutes or so, is not just, or in particular not, all of the stuff that's going on out there, but actually how we need to adapt and change our behaviors and our organization. Because we're all pretty good at keeping up to date. Certainly we have people in our organization who keep up to date. But how is an organization that's been around 100 years, how are you going to actually adapt to today and actually change your DNA about moving to the future? And I hope that's kind of some of the reflections I'll give you over the next few minutes. Why Castrol? Well, firstly, because I work for them, I guess, but it isn't, we don't have in any way a unique position that says we know what's going to happen in the future. What we do, though, have is a couple of things going for us. My business, we deal with mining companies right the way through to shipping, through metals, and to the end game where you put Castrol in your car and you're dealing with the consumers. So we see across the whole value chain, we see what's happening in mining, we see the new materials, and just thinking how that might affect other stuff going on later down in the value chain gives us a little bit of that perspective. But more importantly, when we get people together, when we sit and talk to people from the offshore industry and get them talking to the aerospace industry, it is amazing that the challenges are so similar, both in terms of the hardware and in terms of the attitudes and the behaviors in the organization. The second piece is my business, all my businesses are global. So we play across the whole, the world. And, typically you might think, oh, well, China, that's where we're going to get everything from. It is amazing, as you go around the world, the pockets of excellence, whether it's in Pakistan, Vietnam, China, US, UK, anywhere. And it's trying to pull that together and not assuming that everything is going to come from the East. And the final piece is within the plants themselves. The amount of plants I go into where we're introducing people in procurement to people in production in the same company, or people on the line running the lines to people running the paint shop. The need to actually facilitate discussion, sharing of practice across the actual process within just one plant amazes me. And that's why when I look at the future and when I look at our challenges, a lot of them for me are around behaviors and how do we adopt it. Now, when we started this off a couple of years ago, one of the things that we did first was we actually had immersion programs where we brought people with very different mindsets and we brought government in to actually challenge our thinking. Because the thing that keeps me awake at night is that everything that has made me successful today, everything that's made my organization successful today, are the blockers of what's going to make us successful in the future. When we come with new ideas into our business, our DNA says, what's the risk management? What's the payback? How sure are you going to be that this works? We all talk about we'll tolerate failure, but how many of us actually do that? I know we don't as an organization. And we talk about innovation as it's a separate department rather than innovative. And how do we do that? And we did. We changed the organization in our business. We pulled it apart and put aside separate money. And we, most importantly, brought external people in to govern our interventions for us. Why did we start it in the first place is relatively interesting. We had a board meeting back 3 years ago in Oslo. And we invited the head of BMW to come along and talk to us about business, etc. They're one of our big business partners. And he presented then, 2010, the concept car for 2020. And when he had left, we kind of sat around the table and said, well, what's our concept lubricant? And we had no idea. Because we were waiting for the market. We were waiting for our customers as a good supplier, waiting for our customers to tell us what they needed. And it just doesn't work. Because it means you're placing bets on your customers for the future rather than on yourselves. And too often, we manage the business from the inside out. We kind of have a good idea. We've been around 20 years. We know what the future looks like. And therefore, we have a pretty good path for it. Rather than going out into the market, to our customers and to our suppliers, and actually start that dialogue. Because as we progressed on this, I can assure you, there is no R&D. If I put 100% of my profit and my costs into R&D, it won't be enough if I'm doing it on my own. And therefore, the importance of suppliers and customers working together and stepping away from the day-to-day business and creating truly meaningful strategic relationships where you're sharing your 2030 plans and ideas. And that requires not just a level of trust, but it requires a real deep change in our behaviors and in the relationships we have. But the reality for me is, I can get it right all I like, but if my suppliers get it wrong, I won't be around in 10 years' time. Because who's going to come with me into the future? Or the same with my customers. And it's the same with the outside world. It's about allowing people to come in and really frighten, frankly, the life out of you. And as I went away from each of these sessions, and we had a number of them around the world, and we continue to do that with customers, with suppliers, but with government and with outside universities, etc. as well. The overriding feeling you walk away with is, wow, there may be opportunity, but there's real concern of how we're going to do this. Because we can talk about all the trends, and they're pretty well articulated. But the real issue is the discontinuities. How do you get your head around the discontinuities if you're just talking within your own industry or within your own business? Because if you ever looked and watched the Jurassic Park movie, the raptors don't come at you from the front, they come at you from the side. You can't see them coming, and once they're there, it's far too late. And in particular, in a capital-intensive industry, you can turn this around so quickly that you actually become competitive again. And in today's world, your consumer doesn't care. The consumer doesn't mind the fact that you've invested hundreds of millions of dollars, that they owe you a payback. If somebody else comes along, they switch. And they switch on the global basis, not just on the local basis. So it is critical you talk about the discontinuities. A couple of examples of that for me would be Hyundai. Came as a low-cost car manufacturer where everybody ignored them. Allowed them to create a position because they weren't a competitor in their markets. And look at them today. Or if you look at SpaceX, I know you had NASA here yesterday. Here's a company that designed, developed, and sent an aircraft into space, loading the space station, with a fraction of the cost of the incumbents, and at a speed that none of the incumbents would ever imagine was doable. And this was owned and funded by a guy who ran PayPal, who knew nothing about the aerospace industry. But he knew a lot about adapting technology from other industries, and a lot about questioning convention. Because if I look at my aviation business, I go into aviation, and the first thing they'll say is, don't worry, it takes 10 years to approve anything in this industry. Not if it makes sense for the consumer. The customer, the consumer, will change that paradigm very quickly. We talked about the megatrends, but if we just look at the 20th versus the 21st century, I started business in 1983, 84. You designed, you manufactured, and then you got your sales and marketing people to go out and to really drive your business. They knew what they had to sell, they had a nice core range, and off they went. You created a brand, you created a reputation, and if you looked at your balance sheet, the goodwill in your balance sheet reflected that, how much money you put into your business. What does it look like today? Just a set of raindrops. Your consumer is the king. And this disrupts not just manufacturing. This disrupts logistics, supply chain, everything. Because what you now start to do and find is that you have a minimum order quantity of 1. 3D printing, additive layer manufacturing, whatever you want to call it, is critical. I flew in from London last night, but was here to hear your president talk about how he's got 1 hub today, he's going to raise it to 3 hubs for 3D printing, and he wants to get to 15 just across the US. It changes the whole mindset of what and how manufacturing will play out. It also changes the mindset of the brand. It changes the mindset of the consumer. It changes the mindset of reputation. We have an issue in the UK at the moment. It started about 2 weeks ago. Excuse me if people don't like beef, but what happened was actually hamburgers, frozen hamburgers. They found they had 5% horse meat in the beef hamburgers. Today, 2 companies that have been around over 100 years probably have a value of 0. Because how quickly news, how quickly reputation drives that. It's the same about innovation. It's the same about discontinuities. We have no power to restrict it, to say, okay, that's okay, it's only happening in the US, the rest of the world, I'm fine in that business. Or it's only happening in China, I'm fine, we'll be fine. This happens, it happens quickly, and the consumer drives it extremely quickly. So what we then looked at from that and from those studies was 3 areas. We looked at materials, we looked at manufacturing, and we looked at sustainability. I'm a chemical engineer. When I went to college, there was a periodic table, and once you studied the periodic table, you were fine. You knew that wasn't going anywhere. Today, in the last 3 months, 2 new elements have joined the periodic table, on top of another 30 that have joined it over the last 2 years. Liver-ovium, and I won't even try to pronounce the other one. But 2 elements in the last 2 months. What this is saying to us is actually no longer are you trying to drive manufacturing by what is available. You're thinking about actually what you need, and then you can go and design the materials. Airbus is a great example of this. Airbus has a concept plane for 2050 with a roadmap to 2050 where that plane is 100% manufactured through 3D printing. What does that mean? It means you have a different set of materials. It means you have a fuselage that is totally different to the one today and curved. They can do so much more with it than traditional methods. And the plane itself will be 65% lighter. Will that come to fruition? Probably not in that format. But the myriad of possibilities that 3D printing opens up is what we need to get our heads around. Because I think sometimes we spend so much time focused on the technology rather than what the technology enables. I love a phrase I heard when I was in California recently, which was said, the future is here, it's just unevenly distributed. And what that said to me was, there is so much out there today that if we can adapt it across industries, you have the discontinuities that we talk about existing today. I had dinner recently with the head of Virgin Galactic. And their view is, for them to design their future, they actually went to the past, and they went to other industries. And they designed their spacecraft that's going into space with its passengers this year through technology that was already existent. It was just in different industries. And people hadn't just stepped across the boundaries and looked at it. So I think as you look at the design of materials, whether it's ceramics, whether it's the new elements, whether it's nano, it's critical that we don't put up the barriers, but actually we look and say, what are the opportunities? What are the chances that this plays out in my industry? Because the difficult about this is you are placing bets. And it's how many bets are we willing to place? And it's how many fingers are you going to put into how many pies? But it does change the way you do business. And you cannot expect that people who are 110% to capacity today, driving efficiency in your plant, driving costs in the plant, trying to improve the quality, at the same time, to be able to step out and say, oh, what about these discontinuities? What about the future? We all need to think as an organization how we're going to do that differently. And we need to create and build different relationships. We work with 3 or 4 OEMs. You can't work with everyone, by the way. You have to make choices here. Because when you sit down with the OEMs, and for me, the OEMs are the car manufacturers in this case, and you want them to share with you what their plan is for 2030 or 2040, and you're willing to share with them. It's not a one-off conversation. It's a deep technical relationship about how we work together and how we compromise and make choices. Because the one thing, the biggest waste in my organization today is developing products without the insight of the customer or the future. If I can get rid of that, and I'm working together with my customers and suppliers to do that, it changes the whole game. It allows me to become a thought leader on the future rather than a follower or somebody who's waiting for the discontinuities. If I look at the intelligent factories, I suspect people in this room, I know people in this room will know much more about this than I do. But the changes in the manufacturing today, when you go to China, they're no longer just building big, efficient factories. They're building flexible factories. They're building factories that can today make a washing machine and tomorrow make a refrigerator. They're already changing their manufacturing. It is about high levels of flexibility. It's also about lights out. It's about trying to drive safety and cost through efficiency of process. My first job was in gold, in mining, in South Africa. we used to have 3,500 people on each plant. Within 5 years, there'll be 5 on those same plants. Because of efficiencies, because of process, because of safety. We'll be able to do things so much more flexible. One of our big initiatives at the moment is working with tooling and materials to really understand the dynamics at the point of cut with the lubricants. Because if you can do that, you can design out most of the inefficiencies out of a plant. So for intelligent factories, it's the combination of flexibility in big with 3D, with individuals. 3 years ago, we talked about everything moving east. We talked about the US having a huge energy deficit. That's 5 years ago. Look at where we are today. By 2020, US will be 98% self-reliant, we believe, on energy. And what about factories? With 3D printing, don't you think we're actually going to have much more flexibility on where we do this? And the other point here is you don't have to design and manufacture in the same plant. You actually don't have to design and manufacture in the same country, nor indeed in the same company. The computer power of the world now gives us the ability to actually design, to manufacture wherever you want, linked to the consumer. And it's that mindset, those challenges, that we can either come along and shape, because the one big advantage here is nobody's shaping this at the moment. It is like those droplets of rain. I think the challenge for a room like this is how do you shape the future? How do you change your behaviors? How do you change your approach? Not to just become a little bit more efficient, but to drive the discontinuities in a way that supports the consumer, that supports the business, and actually drives your new strategy. The road to zero is something we hear so much about. Sustainability, it's frankly no longer something that's a wish list. And in most cases, it's probably not even a competitive advantage. It's a given. But going forward, it's not just about sustainability. It's not just being more efficient or reducing the waste. There's so much more around this. We talk about life cycle management. We talk about the lights out manufacturing. That all drives towards road to zero. But the thing that we really need to also focus on that surprised me was on the recycling. As I said, I worked in a gold mine way back. And our business case for running a gold mine or for exploring on a reef was about 5 to 10 grams per ton of gold in the ore. Today, there's 150 grams per ton in mobile phones. 150 grams. There's companies continually, Toyota, Honda in Japan, with the support of the government, are continuously mining and recycling this. If you look at any car today, it might surprise you to find that you've got shredded jeans, milk jugs, detergent bottles, all being recycled and used in the cars today. And it reduces the cost significantly of those cars. There's 100,000 mobile phones per year that are discarded, per day, 100,000 per day discarded in the US alone. And there's 100 million computers per year discarded. 80% of those find themselves on a ship within 2 months to Vietnam, India, and China to be recycled, for the rare earth metals to be taken out of those and recycled back. So therefore, even when we look at the geophysical nature of the world and where the materials are, recycling can change that. And in the West, we haven't quite woken up to that yet. That's what we call urban mining. And our business models and our pay per use. One of the things in cars today is, the studies that are done in most countries saying car usage is somewhere between 5 and 10%. We drive to work, we leave it in the car park, we go in, and we drive home in the evening. The model that everybody are trying to drive there in countries is how do people just use the car when they need it. And the generation coming up behind us certainly don't have the same emotional attachment to cars, maybe, as we had. And again, it changes the whole model for us. The same with factories. How do you use factories 100% of the time? Do you really need a factory? Does it really give you a competitive advantage? Or is it just a way to manufacture your product? How do you change that dynamic? So those are the thoughts, those are the views. But I come back to the piece that says, this is the hardest thing I have done in the last 2 years. Trying to come into work one day and for the morning talk about efficiency, talk about today's result, talk about the need to succeed, talk about the need to deliver the objectives I've set my staff. And then to go to a Castrol Ventures meeting and talk about failure, and talk about risk, and talk about discontinuities. How do we change that? And convincing my CFO that a business case of buying a company for $50 million that hasn't made a profit in 5 years, but actually could create or cause a discontinuity, or investing in that company, is quite a challenge, and it should be. But it's the challenge we need to take on board. So, I hope you found that useful. I appreciate your time and attention, and with that, I'll hand it back to Andy. Thank you very much.